The Valere Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 4,000 years. They were tall creatures with hard shells like insects and eyes that could see in every direction at once. Their empire stretched across 100 star systems, and they had conquered 17 different species. No one had ever defeated them in battle. No one had ever even come close. They believed themselves to be the greatest power the universe had ever known, and for 4,000 years nothing had proven them wrong. Hi, Sovereign Zethkon stood before the Galactic Assembly on that day and spoke with the confidence of a being who had never tasted failure. His voice echoed through the great chamber where ambassadors from dozens of worlds had gathered to listen. The chamber was enormous, with walls made of dark metal and lights that floated in the air like small stars. Representatives from conquered worlds sat in silence while Zethkon delivered his announcement. He spoke of a small blue planet on the edge of the Orion Arm. He spoke of the creatures who lived there and called themselves humans. He called them primitive. He called them the next addition to his glorious empire. Earth had been selected for annexation. The humans would be given 6 standard galactic cycles to prepare their surrender. This was roughly 6 months in Earth time. They would hand over all military equipment and weapons. They would accept Valori governors in every major city. They would become servants of the Dominion like so many species before them. Their children would work in Valoria factories. Their soldiers would be disarmed and retrained as laborers. Their leaders would kneel before the High Sovereign and beg for mercy. This was not a request. This was not a negotiation. This was simply how things were going to be. Zethkon finished his announcement and waited for the fear to spread. He had seen it happen many times before with many different species. Whenever a new world was chosen, the reaction was always the same. Panic would grip the population. Leaders would weep and beg. Citizens would riot in the streets and turn against each other. Some would try to flee to the far corners of their world. Others would simply give up and wait for the end. It was almost boring how predictable lesser species could be. But the human ambassador in the chamber did not react the way Zethkon expected. The man was average height, with brown hair and a calm face. He listened to the entire announcement without any change in his expression. When it was over, he simply nodded once and stood up to leave. He had to make his report to Earth. There was no trembling in his hands. There was no desperation in his eyes. He walked out of the chamber like someone who had just received ordinary news about the weather or a minor schedule change. Zethkon noticed this but did not think much of it. Humans were new to the galactic stage. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel a few decades ago. Perhaps they simply did not understand what was coming for them. Perhaps they were too ignorant to feel proper fear. He would teach them soon enough. 12,000 light years. Away, Admiral Lisa Grant sat in the observation deck of the USS Valiant and watched the broadcast with her crew. The ship was one of humanity's finest vessels. It had been built in orbit around Mars over the course of 15 years. It carried a crew of 400 men and women and enough firepower to level a small moon. Lisa had commanded it for 3 years, and she knew every panel and wire and bolt like she knew her own heartbeat. She was a woman in her late 40s, with short gray hair and sharp blue eyes. She had served in the military for 25 years and had seen combat in 3 different conflicts. Nothing surprised her anymore. Nothing scared her either. The alien's speech played on the main screen of the observation deck. His compound eyes gleamed under the lights of the assembly chamber. His mandibles clicked together as he described how easily Earth would fall. He spoke of human cities burning under orbital bombardment. Spoke of human children being taken away from their families. He spoke of the complete and total end of everything humanity had ever built or dreamed or hoped for. When the broadcast ended, the bridge was completely silent. Every officer looked at their admiral and waited for her response. Some of them were young and had never faced a real threat before. Some of them were veterans who had seen death up close. All of them needed to know what came next. Commander Ben Harris was the first to speak. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and dark skin, and a calm voice that never seemed to waver, no matter how bad things got. He had served under Lisa for 7 years and trusted her judgment completely. "They are giving us a warning," he said quietly. "That is actually quite sporting of them." Lisa smiled. It was a thin expression that her crew had learned to recognize over the years. It was not a happy smile or a nervous smile. It was the smile she wore when she saw an opportunity that others had missed. It was the smile of a hunter who had just spotted her prey. "No, Ben," she said. "No. That is their first mistake." She stood up from her chair and looked at every member of her crew one by one. She saw fear in some of their faces and confusion in others. But she also saw something else beneath those emotions. She saw determination. She saw the stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had carried humanity through ice ages and plagues and wars that should have ended their species a dozen times over. "We have 6 months," Lisa said. "Let us use them well." Back on Earth, the news spread within hours. Every television and computer and phone carried the same message. An alien empire had declared its intention to conquer humanity. The invasion would begin in 6 months. The enemy had 12,000 warships and technology far beyond anything humans had ever created. President Daniel Cooper addressed the United Nations the following morning. He was a plain-looking man in his early 60s, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. He had been a soldier once long ago, and he still carried himself with the discipline of those years. He stood at the podium and looked out at the representatives of every nation on Earth. The alien ambassadors who remained on Earth watched from the gallery above. They expected to see what they had always seen when a world learned of its coming subjugation. They expected tears and screaming and accusations. Expected humans to turn on each other in their final desperate days. Instead, Daniel Cooper spoke calmly. He thanked the Valori for their advance notice. He acknowledged that their empire was vast and their military was powerful beyond measure. He agreed that humanity was young and inexperienced compared to species that had traveled the stars for thousands of years. Then he smiled. It was the same smile that Admiral Lisa Grant had worn on the bridge of her ship. It was the same smile that would come to define humanity in the eyes of the watching galaxy. "We have been given 6 months," Daniel said. "That is more time than we have ever needed to change the course of history. We split the atom in 4 years. We went from wooden airplanes to walking on our moon in 6 decades. We mapped our own genetic code in 13 years. He paused and let the silence fill the chamber. 6 months is a very long time for a species like ours. And I promise the Valori that we will be ready when they arrive. We will be waiting, and we will not surrender a single inch of our world." The chamber erupted in applause, not just from humans, but from ambassadors of other species who had lived under Valori rule for centuries. They had never heard anyone speak to the Dominion this way. Far away in space, Valori spy drones recorded everything. The officers who reviewed the footage exchanged uneasy glances. The humans were not panicking. They were not afraid. They were smiling. 6 months was not much time, but humanity had a peculiar talent that no other species in the galaxy seemed to possess. They excelled under pressure. When their backs were against the wall and extinction stared them in the face, they did not crumble or surrender. They worked harder. They thought faster. It became something greater than they had ever been before. Dr. Megan Cole was the chief physicist at the Geneva Research Collective. She was a small woman with curly red hair and glasses that were always slightly crooked on her face. She had spent her entire career studying theoretical physics and dreaming of discoveries that might take centuries to achieve. Now she had 6 months to turn those dreams into weapons. Her team worked around the clock in shifts that never ended. Scientists from every country on Earth joined the effort. Russians worked beside Americans. Chinese researchers shared data with European labs. Old rivalries and ancient grudges were forgotten overnight because none of that mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was survival. They focused first on the Valori shield technology. A damaged alien probe had been captured 3 years earlier, and its shield generator had been sitting in a warehouse gathering dust. No one had been able to figure out how it worked. The physics behind it seemed impossible. Megan and her team cracked it in 11 weeks. What took the Dominion 3 centuries to develop? Human scientists reverse-engineered through sleepless nights and desperate creativity. They did not just copy the technology. They improved it. They found weaknesses in the design that the Valori had never noticed. They built new shields that were stronger and more efficient than anything the enemy possessed. When Megan presented her findings to the military commanders, they asked her how she had done it so quickly. She pushed her crooked glasses up her nose and shrugged. "We do not have time to say something is impossible," she said. "So we just assumed it was possible and figured out how." Meanwhile, General Chris Lawson coordinated the military response from a bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. He was a large man with a shaved head and scars on his hands from battles fought decades ago. He had commanded troops in 4 different wars and had never lost a single engagement. Now he faced the greatest challenge of his career. Military leaders from every nation gathered in his command center. For the first time in human history, there were no political boundaries in defense planning. The Russian fleet merged with the American fleet. Chinese soldiers trained alongside European soldiers. African nations contributed resources and personnel. South American countries opened their borders for military installations. The entire planet became a single fortress. Chris stood before a holographic map of the solar system and pointed to key positions around Earth and Mars. "And the outer planets? They have numbers," he said. "They have experience. They have technology we are still learning to understand. But they have never fought an enemy like us. They have never faced a species that has been at war with itself for 10,000 years." He smiled grimly. "We know war better than they ever will. We invented it as an art form. And we are going to show them exactly what that means." In Nevada, a young engineer named Jake Morrison unveiled his secret project to a room full of generals and admirals. He was only 32 years old, with messy brown hair and oil stains on his shirt. He had been working on this idea for 5 years in a private facility. Funded by a dozen different governments, he called it the Prometheus Protocol. It was a network of orbital defense platforms hidden among the asteroids and debris that floated through the solar system. Each platform carried kinetic accelerators capable of launching projectiles at a fraction of the speed of light. A single shot could tear through any ship ever built. Jake stood nervously before the military leaders and explained. He showed them simulations of the platforms activating and destroying enemy vessels by the hundreds. He showed them how the platforms were hidden and how they could be controlled remotely from anywhere on Earth. When he finished, General Lawson looked at him with something like wonder in his eyes. "How long have we had this capability?" the general asked. Jake shifted uncomfortably. "About 3 years, sir. We were waiting for the right moment to reveal it." Lawson laughed. It was a deep, booming sound that echoed through the room. "Son, you might have just saved our entire species." On colony ships bound for Mars and Europa, ordinary civilians trained alongside professional soldiers. Grandmother and grandchild alike learned emergency protocols and basic combat techniques. Factory workers studied how to repair damaged ships. Teachers learned how to operate communication equipment. Farmers practiced evacuation procedures. Humanity did not panic. Humanity prepared. In schools across the planet, children learned about the coming threat. They were not told to be afraid. They were told to be ready. They were told that their parents and grandparents were building defenses that would protect them. They were told that humanity had faced extinction before and had always survived. The children believed it, because they could see it happening all around them. They watched their neighbors and families working together. They saw old enemies shaking hands and sharing resources. They witnessed something that had never happened before in human history: total unity. The Valerie watched through their spy drones and felt the first flickers of unease. Every other species they had conquered had descended into chaos upon hearing the announcement. Governments had collapsed. Populations had turned on each other. Leaders had fled, or surrendered, or simply given up. The humans were doing none of these things. High Sovereign Zethkon reviewed the reports in his private chamber aboard the flagship. His compound eyes scanned the data again and again. He watched footage of human factories operating at triple capacity. He watched soldiers training with weapons that had not existed 3 months ago. He watched scientists celebrating breakthroughs that should have taken decades to achieve. One of his advisors approached the throne carefully. "High Sovereign," the advisor said. "Perhaps we should attack now before they are ready." Zethkon clicked his mandibles in annoyance. "We gave them 6 months. That is the tradition of the Dominion. We do not change our ways because of primitives, but High Sovereign. Yes. These primitives are not behaving like any species we have encountered before. They are not fighting among themselves. They are building. Zethkon waved a clawed hand dismissively. Let them build. It will make no difference. Our fleet has destroyed civilizations far older and more advanced than theirs. 6 months of preparation will not save them from 12,000 warships. The advisor bowed and retreated, but doubt lingered in the back of Zethkon's mind. He had watched Daniel Cooper's speech a dozen times. He had studied Lisa Grant's personnel file. He had analyzed every piece of data his spies had collected. None of it made sense. These humans should have been terrified. They should have been desperate. Instead, they worked with a calm efficiency that reminded him of something. It took him several days to realize what it was. They reminded him of predators. Preparing for a hunt, he dismissed the thought as foolish. Humans were prey. They had always been prey. In 6 months, they would kneel before him like every species before them. He was certain of this. On Earth, Admiral Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the newly upgraded USS Valiant and looked out at the growing fleet around her. Ships that had not existed 4 months ago now filled the space around. Earth and Mars. Weapons that had been theoretical were now operational. Soldiers who had been civilians were now trained and ready. She smiled that thin, knowing smile. 6 months, she whispered to herself. Thank you for the warning. The 6 months ended on a Tuesday. High Sovereign Zethkon stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the countdown reach 0. His fleet of 12,000 warships held position at the edge of the solar system. Their weapons were charged and ready. Their soldiers were eager for conquest. This would be the 17th species to fall. Before the might of the Valori Dominion, he had prepared a speech for the surrender ceremony. He had chosen which human leaders would be allowed to live as puppet governors. He had already divided Earth's resources among his most loyal commanders. Everything was planned down to the smallest detail. All that remained was for the humans to accept their fate. He opened a channel to Earth and waited for the terrified faces of their leaders to appear on his screen. He expected begging. He expected tears. He expected the same pathetic display he had witnessed from so many species before. Instead, he saw Admiral Lisa Grant. She stood on the bridge of a ship he did not recognize. It was larger than any human vessel his spies had reported. Its hull was sleek and dark, and covered with weapons systems that glowed with barely contained power. Behind her, through the viewport, he could see an armada of human vessels stretching across the void. Ships that had not existed 6 months ago. Hundreds of them, Lisa wore her dress uniform with every medal she had ever earned pinned to her chest. Her gray hair was pulled back tight, and her blue eyes were calm and steady. She did not look like a woman facing impossible odds. She looked like a woman who had already won. High Sovereign, she began. Her voice was steady and clear. Humanity has received your announcement. We appreciate the warning you gave us. It gave us time. Zethkon felt his mandibles twitch with irritation. This was not how the conversation was supposed to go. Admiral Grant, he said slowly, your bravery is admirable, but foolish. You cannot hope to resist the might of the Dominion. Surrender now, and casualties will be minimized. Your people will be treated fairly under our rule. Lisa tilted her head slightly. That thin smile appeared on her face. You misunderstand, she said. We are not here to surrender. We are here to make our own declaration. She took a step forward, and her eyes seemed to burn with cold fire. You announced your war. High Sovereign. You told the galaxy that you were coming to conquer Earth. You gave us 6 months. To prepare our defeat, she paused. Now we declare our war. And I want you to understand something very clearly. The bridge of the Valori flagship was completely silent. Every officer stared at the human woman on the screen. No one had ever spoken to the High Sovereign this way. No one had ever dared, Lisa continued. We have been fighting each other for 10,000 years. We survived ice ages that killed 90% of our population. We survived plagues that wiped out entire continents. We survived weapons of our own creation that could have ended all life on our world. We invented war as an art form long before your species crawled out of whatever swamp birthed you. Her voice grew harder. You want Earth? Come and take it. The transmission ended. Zethkon sat in stunned silence for several seconds. Then rage flooded through him. His claws dug into the arms of his throne, and his compound eyes blazed with fury. All ships advance, he commanded. Destroy them all. Leave nothing alive, the Valori. Fleet surged forward, and humanity smiled. The first engagement took place near the orbit of Neptune. A Valori vanguard of 500 ships encountered a human defense force of 50 vessels. The math seemed simple. 10-to-1 odds in favor of the Dominion. The Valori attacked in perfect formation. They had used the same tactics for 4,000 Y. Ears against 17 different species. Their ships moved as one. Their weapons fired in synchronized volleys. Their shields overlapped to create an impenetrable wall of energy. The humans did not fight in formation. Commander Kevin Blake led the first strike wing in a ship called the Hornet. He was 28 years old and had spent most of his life playing combat simulations and flight games. Now those thousands of hours of practice guided his hands as he weaved between enemy vessels at speeds the Valori had never encountered. His squadron scattered in every direction. Each pilot made independent decisions. Each ship found its own target. There was no pattern the Valori computers could predict because there was no pattern at all. It was chaos, and humans thrived in. Chaos. Kevin spotted a gap in the enemy formation where two ships had drifted slightly apart. He pushed his engines to maximum and shot through the opening. His weapons tore into the unshielded flank of a Valor cruiser. The ship exploded in a ball of fire. First kill, he announced over the radio. Who wants second? The human pilots responded with enthusiasm. They darted and spun and attacked from angles the Valori had never considered. They used asteroids as cover. They flew so close to enemy vessels that the larger ships could not target them without hitting each other. Within 20 minutes, the vanguard was in disarray. The humans had lost 12 ships. The Valore had lost 143. The reports reached High Sovereign Zethkon, and he refused to believe them. There had to be an error. Humans could not fight like this. They were primitives. They were supposed to be easy prey. He ordered more ships forward. Near the orbit of Saturn, the main Valor fleet encountered the bulk of the human armada. Admiral Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance and watched the enemy approach on her tactical display. Thousands of red dots swarmed toward the blue dots that represented her forces. They still outnumber us significantly, Commander Ben Harris observed. Lisa nodded calmly. Numbers are not everything, Ben, asked the Spartans at Thermopylae. Ask the defenders of Rorke's Drift. Ask anyone who has ever faced humanity. When we were cornered and desperate, she turned to her communications officer. Signal all ships. Execute Battle Plan Omega, and someone play some music. I want the enemy to hear us coming. Across the human fleet, speakers crackled to life. The sound of drums and guitars and human voices filled the void of space. It was a song about not surrendering. A song about standing firm against impossible odds. A song that had been written centuries ago by humans who had faced their own desperate battles. The Valori intercepted the transmission and were confused. Why were the humans playing music? What purpose did it serve? Their tactical computers had no way to process this information. Lisa watched the enemy formation on her screen and smiled. They have no idea what they are dealing with, she said quietly. They think this is a conquest. She straightened her uniform and took a deep breath. This is a fight for survival. And no species in this galaxy fights harder for survival than humanity. She gave the order to attack. The Battle of Saturn's Rings had begun. The war raged for 3 months across the solar system. The Valor had numbers and experience and technology refined over 4,000 years of conquest. They had never lost a war. They had never even come close to losing. Their tactics were perfect. Their formations were flawless. Their commanders had studied warfare for centuries, but humanity had something the Valori could never understand. Humanity had chaos and creativity and the absolute refusal to follow the rules. Lieutenant Amy Price was 24 years old and came from a small town in Ohio. She had joined the fleet 8 months ago as a pilot trainee. Now she flew an interceptor in the thick of battle with enemy fire screaming past her cockpit. Her squadron had been tasked with disabling a Valori dreadnought. It was a massive ship 3 kilometers long with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Its shields were impenetrable to conventional weapons. Its hull was armored with materials humanity had only recently learned to work with. There was no way to destroy it. Amy found a way anyway. She noticed that the shield generator on the dreadnought pulsed with a specific rhythm. Every 47 seconds there was a tiny fluctuation, a gap of less than a second where a small enough object might slip through. She told her commander about the observation. He told her it was impossible to exploit. The timing was too precise. No pilot could hit that window consistently. Amy did not argue. She simply waited for the next fluctuation and pushed her engines to maximum. Her interceptor shot toward the dreadnought at speeds that made her vision blur. At the exact right moment, she angled her ship, slipped through the gap in the shields. She was inside the enemy defenses. Her weapons were too weak to damage the ship from here. But she was not aiming for the hull. She was aiming for the shield generator itself. She fired everything she had into the exposed machinery and then ejected from her cockpit half a second before her ship crashed into the generator. The explosion tore through the dreadnought's defensive systems. Its shields collapsed completely. Amy floated in the cold vacuum of space in nothing but her flight suit and emergency oxygen. She watched human ships swarm the now defenseless dreadnought and tear it apart piece by piece. She floated for 6 hours before a rescue team found her. When they pulled her aboard and asked why she had done something so insane, she just shrugged. Seemed like the right call, she said. Stories like Amy's spread through the fleet and back to Earth. They became legends. They became proof that individual humans could change the course of battles. Through sheer determination and creativity, the Valori had no equivalent stories. Their soldiers followed orders. Their pilots flew in formation. Their commanders used tactics from ancient textbooks. When something unexpected happened, they struggled to adapt. Humans adapted instantly. On Mars, the Valori managed to land occupation forces in the first month of the war. They expected the human colonists to surrender and accept their rule. They expected to establish a base from which to launch attacks on Earth. They did not expect Corporal Danny West. Danny was 31 years old and had grown up in the tunnels beneath the Martian surface. He knew every passage and chamber and hidden corner of the colony. When the Valori arrived, he gathered 200 volunteers and began a guerrilla campaign that would become famous throughout the galaxy. They struck without warning. They appeared from tunnels the Valori did not know existed. They destroyed supply depots and communication centers and command posts. They vanished before the enemy could respond. Danny used tactics from every insurgency in human history. He studied the American Revolution and the French Resistance, and countless other conflicts were small. Forces had defeated larger ones through cunning and patience. The Valori had never encountered guerrilla warfare. Their previous conquests had been against species that surrendered or fought in conventional battles. They did not understand enemies who refused to face them directly. After 2 months of constant harassment, they abandoned Mars entirely. The cost of holding it was simply too high. In space, Admiral Lisa Grant executed what historians would later call the Wellington Maneuver. She named it after an old Earth general who had been famous for choosing his battlegrounds carefully. She drew the main Valori fleet into an asteroid field near Jupiter. The enemy commanders saw only rocks and debris. They did not see what Lisa saw. Human miners had worked in this asteroid field for decades. They knew every rock and crevice and gravitational anomaly. They had hidden weapons platforms among the asteroids. They had mapped safe passages and deadly zones. The Valori flew in with confidence. They outnumbered the human forces 3-1. Their sensors showed nothing but harmless rocks. Then the trap closed. Kinetic. Projectiles screamed out of the darkness from 100 different directions. Asteroids that had seemed stationary suddenly moved as human ships emerged from hidden positions. The gravitational anomalies that the miners knew so well pulled Valori vessels off course and into each other. 2,000 Valori ships were destroyed in a single day. High Sovereign. Zethkon received the reports in his private chamber, and for the first time in his long reign, he felt genuine fear. His fleet had been reduced from 12,000 ships to 8,000. Human losses were significant, but they kept building new vessels at an impossible rate. His advisors urged him to retreat, to regroup, to call for reinforcements from other parts of the Dominion. Zethkon refused. Retreat would be an admission of failure. It would show the galaxy that the Valori could be beaten. Every conquered species would begin to wonder if they too could fight back. He could not allow that. "We will attack Earth directly," he commanded. "We will end this war with overwhelming force. Gather every ship we have remaining. We will burn their homeworld from orbit if we must." His advisors bowed and obeyed. The final Valori fleet of 6,000 ships gathered at the edge of Earth's system. They formed into a massive sphere bristling with weapons. Their plan was simple: surround the planet, destroy everything in orbit, bombard the surface until nothing remained. If they could not conquer humanity, they would exterminate them. Admiral Lisa Grant watched the enemy formation from the bridge of the USS Defiance. Her fleet had been reduced to 800 operational vessels. Many of her best pilots and commanders were dead. The ships that remained were battered and running low on ammunition. The odds were worse than they had ever been. She turned to Commander Ben Harris. "Well, Ben," she said calmly, "this is it. Everything we have been fighting for comes down to this moment." Ben nodded. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Lisa looked out at the stars. She thought about her parents and her siblings and every person on Earth, waiting to learn their fate. "Tell the fleet to prepare for Protocol Omega," she said, "and tell them it has been an honor serving with them." The final battle for Earth was about to begin. The final battle took place above Earth itself. On a cold morning in December, 6,000 Valori warships formed a sphere around the blue planet. Their weapons pointed downward at the cities and oceans and forests below. High Sovereign Zethkon stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the world he was about to destroy. 800 human ships waited between his fleet and their homeworld. They were outnumbered nearly 8-1. They were outgunned. They were exhausted from 3 months of constant warfare. By every logical measure, they had already lost, but they did not retreat. Zethkon opened a communication, channeled to the human fleet. Admiral Lisa Grant appeared on his screen one final time. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes and new lines on her face, but her gaze was still steady. Her voice was still calm. "Admiral Grant," Zethkon said, "this is your last chance. Surrender now, and I will spare your civilian population. Continue to resist, and I will reduce your world to ashdot." Lisa stared at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was that same thin, knowing smile she had worn from the very beginning. "High Sovereign," she said, "do you know what makes humanity different from every other species you have conquered?" Zethkon clicked his mandibles impatiently. "Your delusions of grandeur?" "No," Lisa replied. "We never know when to quit. We fight when we should surrender. We hope when we should despair. We smile when we should weep." She leaned forward. "You gave us 6 months to prepare. You announced your intentions to the entire galaxy. And now you expect us to simply give up because the odds are against us?" She shook her head slowly. "You still do not understand what you are facing." She turned to her crew. "All ships, execute Protocol Omega." Across the solar system, hidden platforms activated. The Prometheus protocol that engineer Jake Morrison had built years ago finally revealed its full power. Hundreds of kinetic accelerator stations, scattered among the asteroids and debris fields, opened fire simultaneously. Projectiles traveling at a fraction of light, speed screamed toward the Valori formation. Each one was small enough to be nearly invisible to sensors. Each one carried enough kinetic energy to tear through any shield or armor ever created. The first wave struck the outer ring of the Valori sphere. Dozens of ships exploded in seconds. The formation began to break apart as commanders tried to evade the unseen death raining down on them. But that was only the beginning. Human ships throughout the fleet began activating preset programs. Many of them were crewed by volunteers who had signed up for one-way missions. They knew they would not survive what came next. They had said goodbye to their families. They had written final letters. They had made peace with their fates. And then they flew directly into the heart of the enemy formation. Nuclear charges detonated inside the Valori sphere. Each explosion consumed dozens of ships in blinding fire. The carefully planned formation collapsed into chaos. Ships collided with each other as they tried to escape the inferno. Admiral Lisa Grant watched the destruction from the bridge of the USS Defiance. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her voice remained steady as she coordinated the attack. All remaining ships engage at will. She commanded, "Make every shot count." The 800 human vessels charged into the chaos. They fought without formation and without coordination. Each captain chose their own targets. Each pilot found their own opportunities. It was exactly the kind of fight humans had been waging against each other for 10,000 years, when the dust and debris finally cleared 3,000. Valori ships remained. They faced fewer than 400 human vessels. High Sovereign Zephcon looked at the carnage around him. Half his fleet was gone. His flagship was damaged. His commanders were dead or scattered. For the first time in 4,000 years of Valori's history, a conquered species had fought back, and they were winning. His face appeared on every human screen. His compound eyes were wide with something that looked like terror. His voice trembled. "This is unprecedented," he said. "No species has ever resisted the dominion like this. No species has ever inflicted such losses." Lisa cut him off. "No species has ever been human." She gestured to her crew behind her. They were bloodied and exhausted. Some of them were wounded. All of them were still standing. "You gave us 6 months to surrender," Lisa continued. "We used it to prepare. You declared war on a species that has spent its entire existence at war. With nature. With each other. With the universe itself." Her eyes were cold but bright. "Did you really think you were the worst thing we have ever faced?" Zephcon was silent. Lisa straightened her uniform. "Here is our counteroffer. Take your fleet. Leave our system. Return to your empire and tell the Galactic Assembly what happened here today. Tell them that Earth stood alone against the might of the Valori Dominion. Tell them that 800 ships defeated 6,000. Tell them that humanity refused to kneel." She paused. "And tell them that we are done being underestimated." The remaining Valori ships withdrew. They limped away from Earth, with their shields failing and their hulls scarred. They carried with them stories that would spread across the galaxy. It's like wildfire. Stories of a species that smiled in the face of annihilation. Stories of pilots who sacrificed themselves without hesitation. Stories of an admiral who never lost her composure, even when facing impossible odds. In the aftermath, the Galactic Assembly gathered to review the footage of the conflict. 17 species watched as alone. World had defied the greatest military power in known. Space.1 ambassador from a race long subjugated by the Valori approached the human delegate with a simple question: "How did you do this?" Ambassador Paul Brennan was a tired man with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes. He had not slept properly in months. He had watched friends and colleagues die in the fighting. He had wondered many times if humanity would survive. But now he smiled. The same smile Admiral Grant had worn. The same smile President Cooper had shown. The same smile that had confused and terrified the Valori from the very beginning. "You announced your war," Paul said. "You gave us time. And you underestimated the one thing that makes humanity dangerous." The ambassador leaned forward. "What is that?" Paul stood and straightened his jacket. "Hope, spite, and the absolute refusal to go." Quietly into the night, he left the chamber. Behind him, the representatives of 100 worlds whispered among themselves. A new truth had been revealed to the galaxy. There were some worlds you did not threaten, some species you did not provoke. Earth was one of them, and humanity. Humanity only smiled back,